They're succulent, spiky, and synonymous with a certain alcoholic beverage. This is the blue agave, but it isn't being grown in its native Tequila, Mexico. Instead, it's on the Atherton tablelands in Far-North Queensland.
So we've got 3,000 plants here at the moment. We've chosen this plant because it's in a very similar position in Mexico, so the same distance away from the equator and the same elevation from the sea. We've chosen it for its drought-proof qualities, so we're not going to irrigate it. It's going to be grown in quite rough country.
This trial crop is on land owned by MSF Sugar, not far from the company's Tableland Mill, which is undergoing a $75 million green energy power plant expansion. At the moment, the mill produces tens of thousands of tonnes of raw sugar. That takes a lot of energy, but the mill generates most of its own by burning the dry, pulpy residue of crushed cane and exports what it doesn't need into the grid. With blue agave, the plan is to also burn it to make power, and it could happen even outside of cane crushing season, turning the mill into a year-round power generator.
We've got facilities that we only use for half the year. The power station that we're building at the moment is only going to be used for 9 months a year, so I'm looking for something to put in it for the other 3 months of the year, which will then make it base load, green, renewable electricity for the local community.
And the agave would also offer other valuable opportunities, including making biofuel.
We want to separate the useful parts of the agave plant. So we want to separate the fermentable juice, we want to separate the fibre, and we want to actually separate the waxes as well.
But it will take time to work out exactly how the agave and its different parts can be put to use commercially. This crop went in at the end of 2017 and won't be finished growing for 5 years. By the time they're ready for harvest, each plant can weigh up to 150 kilograms. Unlike in Mexico, where they're really only after the juice, which is in the stem, MSF Sugar plans to use the entire blue agave. As it stands right now, sugar is the main commodity coming out of this facility. Cane is grown and cut on company-owned farmland and under contract on private land. But unlike most other sugar mills, it's only cut when it's about to be crushed, maximising how much sugar is extracted.
What you can see behind us goes into the bin, and a truck picks that up and takes it to the mill within 2 hours. So we harvest 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 25 weeks of the year.
It's one of the smallest sugar mills in Queensland, but at just 20 years old, it's also the newest and arguably the most innovative.
It's got a central control room. It looks more like a petrochemical plant or a mining facility than it does a sugar mill. It was designed like that on purpose because we really do want to turn it into a biorefinery.
This work is a big step in that process.
So this is the old mill here, and you can see in the background we've got our current boiler, which we use to generate the electricity and the steam to run this mill site now.
The boiler is being replaced with much more energy-efficient technology so they can make even better use of their bagasse, the sugarcane byproduct that's burnt to run the factory.
So at the moment we generate 7 megawatts of power, and we're going to generate 24 megawatts of power. So it's around 4 times as much power from the same amount of biomass.
And this big thing here is a dust collector. Can you explain that?
Yes. So when we burn the fibre, we get little bits of particles left behind that we can't burn. So this here actually removes all of that out of the air. So when it goes up the stack, we don't see anything. There won't be any sort of waste material going out the stack.
Sugarcane is their most valuable commodity, but the company needed something else to make the most of this new infrastructure.
we came across agave, and agave was really interesting for us because you could grow it on land which wasn't suitable for sugarcane. It didn't need irrigation. You got a huge amount of biomass from it, and you could also make ethanol from it. So you got two things out of the one crop. So yeah, fibre plus the ethanol.
But it wasn't quite as simple as just deciding to grow blue agave and then doing it. Blue agave is the base ingredient for tequila. Much like champagne from Champagne, tequila from Tequila is a highly protected brand, and the Mexicans work hard to keep it that way. Because they want to separate the fermentable juice, MSF Sugar took their plans to Mexico and put it all on the table.
We had a meeting with the Tequila Council. I presented to the Tequila Council what we were trying to achieve and explained what we were doing, which was not in competition to make tequila, but was actually make a biofuel and a biorefinery out of the product. They were pleased with that. They're very protective of their brand, and the brand is very valuable.
The next step was actually getting the blue agave into Australia. 2,500 tissue culture plants were sourced from Mexico, and after months in quarantine and more time growing in a nursery, they went into the ground last November. They were planted on this block particularly because it's unsuitable for growing cane.
It's a little bit small geographically. It's hard to get water here. We wouldn't run big long rows for our harvesters, so this is land we wouldn't use.
But the blue agave seems so far to be coping just fine.
We're really happy with the progress they're making. We're not seeing any sort of bug damage. We're not seeing any sort of adverse reactions to the limited amount of water we get during our wet season. So we're happy with how they're going.
Right now, keeping tabs on their growth isn't too difficult, but give it a little longer and the job won't be so simple.
Yeah, don't get too close to them. They're not very friendly. We test them every month, so we're checking the stem diameter, to see how wide they're going and how high they're getting as well. By next year, I don't expect you'll walk up those rows anymore. They'll start closing in, and it will just become one big mass canopy.
The trial crop itself is also about to get much bigger.
So there's 45,000 in at the nursery at the moment. By the first rains in November, we hope to have 50,000 plants in the ground.
This is what 10,000 odd baby blue agaves look like.
So these little fellas have just come out of a tissue culture lab. They're steaming away here in the mist house in these lovely humid conditions until they can get established enough to go and join the rest outside in the sun.
And have you had agaves that have come from tissue culture direct from Mexico in this mist house?
Yep, they're well and truly established outside already. So that's that 9,600 that's sitting out there.
This little patch of Mexico is at Yaruga Nursery in Walkerman, Far-North Queensland. It's owned by the HOWE family. And although now he's known as Australia's second largest banana grower, Dennis Howe is no stranger to experimenting with different crops.
Mum and Dad started in the 50s, the other side of Mareeba, growing tobacco. In 1974, they wanted to get out of the tobacco industry and we came to Walkerman, bought a red soil farm. We grew peanuts, potatoes, navy beans, all sorts of crops.
While there's no plans to expand en masse into blue agave, learning to grow the succulents is keeping the team busy.
James and I went there last year. We actually drove through the town called Tequila, and you can only sell tequila that's grown in that one little province. But no, it's certainly an interesting crop.
So anything that's about a bit longer than 15 centimetres,
Right.
and holds a decent root ball, we're pulling out. We're putting into a tray of their own,
Yep.
and that's where they'll stay until they're ready to plant out in the paddock with the next wet season.
Work is also underway to grow the blue agave themselves in-house.
We've just started trying to tissue culture it to get our skills up there. But essentially, a lot of the agave you've seen has been initiated in Mexico, comes through quarantine.
So these have been growing in MSF's trial site for a few months now. From here, we'll chop them up and we'll try and clone them in the tissue culture lab. So we'll be able to mass produce our own out of these plants.
It's a destructive process. The original plant has to be sacrificed, but from just one blue agave, they can make up to 800 plantlets. Once they're in the ground, and after a few years of growing, then comes the next big challenge: how to harvest and process the notoriously spiky plants.
In Mexico, they do it all by hand. They chop the leaves off, they've got a machete type of implement, and then they pick up the actual centre part of the plant and they put it on the back of a donkey. We're not going to be doing it anything like that.
Instead, the plan is to retool old harvesters sitting in many cane farmers' sheds.
So we'll get an old cane harvester and then we'll modify it to be able to harvest the whole plant. And that's what we want to take to the factory.
The hope is, if it's successful, more far north growers will consider growing agave, especially if the plants can be used for a number of different and valuable products, including high-end cosmetics made with waxes from the leaves.
Ideally, I'd like to have a wax extraction plant on the side of the sugar mill. So you start to make a large-scale factory which is making sugar, it's making electricity, it's making ethanol, it's making cattle feed, it's making waxes, it can make biodiesel. It makes a lot of interesting things.
The end goal is to eventually use both bagasse and agave fibre to power the mill to produce 110,000 tonnes of raw sugar, baseload electricity for 28,000 homes, and 55 million litres of ethanol biofuel every year. It's a big dream. And then there's the lingering question of what other byproducts might come down the track.
Good luck, boys.
It can't be sold as tequila, but it can use the agave plant to make a drinking alcohol. That's not something that we would do as a company, but I'm sure there'll be some small producers around the tableland region who would be interested in doing that.
Do you reckon there'll be any market for drinking alcohol out of the blue agave?
Who knows? I'm sure there'll be people who'll try it.
Would it be something you'd dabble in?
No, not me personally. No. It's easy to go and buy it.
Those wanting to partake in a homegrown version will have to wait a while for first drinks though, if at all. This trial crop won't be ready for harvest until 2022.